morning sun rose over Dracon Prime, casting golden light across the massive cliffs where the ancient dragons made their nests. Admiral Krelthar stood in the observation room of the orbital station, his four eyes scanning the planet below. He had served the Galactic Federation for 200 years, and in all that time few things surprised him anymore. The dragons were among the Federation's oldest and most respected members. Their traditions stretched back thousands of years. Their wisdom was legendary, and their military strength was unmatched across the known galaxy. Today was supposed to be a routine day. The dragon breeding season was ending, and the new hatchlings were being assessed by their elders. It was a sacred time for the dragon people, one that outsiders rarely witnessed. The Federation had strict rules about interfering with member species during their cultural ceremonies, and everyone followed those rules without question. Everyone except humans. Apparently, Lieutenant Jake Morrison had been assigned to patrol duty around the breeding sanctuaries. The humans were new to the Federation, having joined only 5 years ago after their planet Earth was discovered by a survey team. They were strange creatures, these humans. They were fragile compared to most species with thin skin and weak bones. They needed special equipment just to survive in environments that other species found comfortable. Yet they had a reputation for being stubborn, creative, and occasionally reckless. They had a saying that the Admiral had heard repeated many times in the halls of the Federation. Humans did not ask for permission, they asked for forgiveness. Jake's patrol route was simple. He was to fly his small scout ship in a wide circle around the dragon sanctuaries, monitoring for any unauthorized vessels or unusual activity. The job was boring, the kind of assignment given to junior officers to teach them patience and attention to detail. Most pilots would complete their patrol, file their report, and return to the station without incident. Jake Morrison was not most pilots. 3 hours into his patrol, Jake's sensors detected unusual energy readings near the southern cliffs. The readings were faint, barely noticeable, and could easily have been dismissed as natural background radiation from the planet's magnetic field. Standard procedure dictated that he should note the readings in his log and continue his patrol. If the readings persisted, he could report them when he returned to the station. Instead, Jake changed course and flew toward the source of the readings. His curiosity was a very human trait, one that had gotten his species into trouble many times before. He brought his ship down in a small clearing near the cliffs, landing gear settling into the soft earth with a gentle thud. The ship's computer immediately began analyzing the local atmosphere and confirmed it was safe for him to breathe without a helmet. Jake grabbed his survival pack and stepped out of the ship. The air was warm and smelled like sulfur and stone, typical for a dragon world. He could hear the distant calls of adult dragons communicating with each other, their voices like thunder rolling across the sky. He walked carefully toward the cliff face, following the readings on his handheld scanner. Behind a formation of crystal rocks that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, Jake found something that made him stop in his tracks. A small dragon hatchling lay curled against the rocks, barely moving. It was about the size of a large dog from Earth, with deep blue scales that shimmered in the sunlight. But something was wrong. The hatchling's left wing was twisted and bent at an unnatural angle, clearly malformed from birth. Jake approached slowly, making soft sounds to avoid startling the creature. The hatchling lifted its head weakly, revealing bright golden eyes that held a mixture of fear and resignation. It tried to scoot backward, but the movement caused it pain, and it let out a small whimper that sounded heartbreakingly similar to a puppy in distress. The pilot knelt down a few feet away from the hatchling and set down his pack. He knew he should report this immediately. He knew he was breaking protocol by even being here. But as he looked into those golden eyes, he thought of his younger sister Amy back on Earth. She had been born with a condition that affected her legs, and the old societies of Earth might have cast her aside as worthless. But humanity had learned better. Amy had grown up to become a brilliant scientist, her mind unhindered by her body's limitations. Jake pulled out his water canteen and poured some into his hand, extending it toward the hatchling. The small dragon watched him suspiciously for a moment, then slowly stretched its neck forward and lapped at the water with a rough tongue. The hatchling drank greedily, and Jake realized it had probably been here for days without food or water. He opened his emergency rations and broke off small pieces, offering them to the dragon. The hatchling sniffed the food cautiously before eating. It was clearly starving. As the little dragon ate, Jake examined its wing more closely. The bone structure was wrong, twisted from the moment it had formed inside the egg. In dragon society, he knew such defects meant death. The elders would never allow a dragon that could not fly to join the clutch. It was tradition, harsh but practical in their eyes. Jake could not accept that. He pulled out his medical kit and began fashioning a splint for the wing, using flexible carbon rods and soft bandaging material. The hatchling flinched at first but seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help. When the splint was in place, the wing was at least supported properly, no longer dragging painfully on the ground. The little dragon made a soft chirping sound that almost seemed like gratitude. Jake smiled and gently scratched under its chin, the way he used to pet his childhood dog. The hatchling closed its eyes and began making a low rumbling sound, almost like a purr. Small sparks of electricity danced across its scales, and Jake decided right then to call it Sparks. For the next several hours, Jake stayed with Sparks. He used his ship's emergency tarp to construct a simple shelter to provide shade. He gave the hatchling more food and water. And when Sparks seemed strong enough, Jake found a smooth stone and rolled it across the ground. The hatchling's eyes locked onto the moving object, and despite its disability, it pounced after the stone with its good foreleg. When it caught the stone, Sparks looked up at Jake with what could only be described as pride and joy. They played together like that for a long time. Jake would roll the stone, and Sparks would chase it, gradually gaining confidence and moving with its injured wing supported by the splint. The hatchling even managed a small hop at one point, landing awkwardly but safely. Each small victory was celebrated with gentle praise from Jake and happy chirps from Sparks. Jake did not notice the surveillance drone that had been dispatched to locate him when he missed his scheduled check-in. He did not see the live feed being transmitted back to the orbital station, where Admiral Krelthar watched with growing astonishment. The Admiral observed as this young human pilot, who should have been following his patrol route, instead sat on the ground, playing with a disabled dragon hatchling that, by all traditions, should have been left to die. The Admiral's communications officer approached hesitantly and asked if they should send a retrieval team to bring the pilot back. Krelthar continued watching the screen, where Jake was now singing softly to Sparks while cleaning the hatchling's scales with a damp cloth. The dragon was completely relaxed, trusting this strange alien creature completely. The Admiral made his decision. He would send the retrieval team, yes, but he would accompany them personally. He needed to understand what would drive a human to break every protocol, to risk his career and potentially cause a diplomatic incident, all for a creature that his own species had deemed unworthy of life. Perhaps in understanding this one reckless human, he might understand humanity itself a little better. As the Admiral prepared to descend to the planet's surface, he watched Jake and Sparks one more time on the screen. The human was lying on his back now, and the hatchling was curled up against his side, both of them resting peacefully in the warm afternoon sun. It was a simple scene, but something about it troubled the Admiral's carefully ordered understanding of how the galaxy should work. He had a feeling that everything was about to change. The transport ship descended through the atmosphere of Draken Prime, with Admiral Krelthar standing at the main viewport, watching the clouds part beneath them. Beside him stood Commander Vexnor, one of the most decorated dragon warriors in the entire Federation. Vexnor's scales were deep crimson, marked with silver scars from countless battles. He had served for over 3 centuries, and was deeply respected among his people for his unwavering dedication to dragon traditions. The commander had not spoken since they left the orbital station. His jaw was set in a hard line and his eyes burned with barely contained anger. To him, what the human pilot had done was not just a violation of Federation protocol, but an insult to everything the dragon people held sacred. A hatchling with a deformed wing had no place in dragon society. It was the way things had always been, the way things must always be. The strong survived and the weak were allowed to pass peacefully rather than suffer a life of inadequacy. The Admiral understood Vexnor's perspective, but he could not shake the image from the surveillance feed. The way the hatchling had looked at the human pilot, the way it had played and showed joy despite its disability, challenged something fundamental about the assumptions they all made. Their ship landed near Jake's scout vessel, and the boarding ramp extended with a soft hiss. The Admiral led a small security team down onto the planet's surface, with Commander Vexnor close behind. The air was hot and dry, and the smell of sulfur was stronger here on the ground. In the distance, they could hear the calls of adult dragons as they taught their young ones to fly. They found Jake Morrison sitting cross-legged on the ground with the dragon hatchling curled in his lap. The human was singing quietly, some sort of earth melody about sunshine and returning home. He was carefully cleaning the hatchling's scales with a damp cloth, working around the makeshift splint he had constructed. The small dragon's eyes were closed, and it made soft rumbling sounds of contentment. When Jake noticed the approaching group, he did not jump up or show fear. Instead, he carefully shifted the hatchling off his lap and whispered something to it before standing to face them. His uniform was covered in dust and ash, and his face was smudged with dirt, but his eyes were clear and steady. He looked directly at the Admiral and nodded respectfully. Admiral Krelthar studied the young human for a long moment. Jake Morrison was unremarkable by most species standards. He was of average height for a human, with brown hair and brown eyes. There was nothing physically impressive about him. Yet he stood there without flinching, knowing he had broken serious rules but showing no regret for his actions. The Admiral expected excuses or apologies. He expected the human to beg for mercy or try to explain away his violations. Instead, Jake simply told them the truth. He spoke about his sister Amy, who had been born unable to walk without help. He talked about how Earth's old societies had sometimes treated disabled people as burdens, but how humanity had learned that every person had value regardless of their physical limitations. His sister had become one of Earth's leading scientists in quantum physics, proving that a body's weakness did not reflect the mind's strength. When Jake saw Sparks alone and suffering, waiting to die simply because of how it was born, he saw his sister. He saw wasted potential. He could not follow a rule that told him to walk away from a child in need, no matter what species that child belonged to. It went against everything he believed about right and wrong. Commander Vexnor stepped forward, his massive form towering over the human. The dragon's claws dug into the earth as he approached, and for a moment it seemed he might strike Jake down where he stood. But then Vexnor looked past the human to where Sparks was attempting to stand. The hatchling struggled with its balance, the damaged wing throwing off its center of gravity. Before it could fall, Jake was there, steadying it with gentle hands, supporting the small dragon without making it feel weak or helpless. Something flickered across Vexnor's ancient face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. He moved closer to the hatchling, lowering his massive head to Sparks's level. The small dragon looked up at this elder of its kind with wide eyes, uncertain but not afraid. Vexnor performed the traditional dragon greeting, touching his snout gently to the hatchling's snout. Sparks responded instinctively, and the two dragons stood there for a moment in silent communication. The Admiral watched this exchange with fascination. In all his years of service, he had never seen Commander Vexnor show such gentleness. The old warrior was known for his harsh adherence to tradition, his absolute belief in the dragon way. Yet here he was, offering respect and recognition to a hatchling that his culture had already condemned. Vexnor straightened and turned to face the Admiral. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition and the tremor of newly awakened doubt. He said that he had never questioned the old ways before. He had accepted that difficult choices were necessary for the survival and strength of his people. But watching the surveillance footage, seeing this human care for a rejected hatchling with such dedication, had forced him to ask uncomfortable questions. The commander asked permission to remain on the surface and observe the human's methods. He wanted to see if there truly was another way, a path that did not require abandoning their weakest members to die alone. It was a shocking request from someone so dedicated to tradition, and it revealed how deeply Jake's actions had affected him. Admiral Krelthar granted the request, though he knew it would cause controversy. He ordered his security team to establish a temporary camp near Jake's position. The human pilot would be allowed to continue caring for Sparks under observation, but the Admiral made it clear that this was not approval of his actions. It was merely a postponement of judgment until they could fully understand the situation. Over the next several days, Commander Vexnor watched Jake work with Sparks. The human had a seemingly endless patience. He would encourage the hatchling to move, to explore, to play. When Sparks struggled with his balance, Jake was there to catch him. When the little dragon grew frustrated with his limitations, Jake would distract him with games or puzzles. Jake had brought various objects from his ship and used them to challenge Sparks mentally. He created obstacle courses that the hatchling could navigate using his 3 good legs and his supported wing. He taught Sparks to solve simple problems like how to open a container to get food inside, or how to move objects by pushing them with his snout instead of carrying them. What amazed Vexnor most was how quickly Sparks learned and adapted. The hatchling developed stronger hind legs to compensate for his limited flight ability. He learned to use his tail for balance in ways that fully able dragons never needed to master. His mind was sharp and creative, finding solutions that other dragons might never consider because they could simply fly over obstacles. One afternoon, Vexnor watched as Jake set up a new challenge for Sparks. He had placed food on a platform that was too high for the hatchling to reach by jumping. A normal dragon would simply fly up to get it. Sparks studied the problem for several minutes, then began dragging nearby rocks over to the platform. He stacked them carefully, creating crude stairs, and climbed up to claim his reward. The commander felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had not experienced in many years. Pride. Not just for the hatchling's cleverness, but for the realization that his people might have been destroying potential like this for generations. How many brilliant minds had they lost because those minds came in imperfect bodies? That evening, as the sun set over Dracon Prime, Vexnor sat with Jake while Sparks slept between them. The dragon commander spoke of his own clutchmate from centuries ago, a sister who had been born with weak lungs. She could not breathe the thin air at high altitudes where dragons typically made their homes. According to tradition, she had been taken to the Mercy Cliffs and left to die peacefully. Vexnor had been young then, and he had accepted it as necessary. But now, watching Sparks thrive under Jake's care, he wondered what his sister might have become if she had been given the chance to adapt and grow. Perhaps she would have become a great thinker, a teacher, an artist. The dragon people might have lost something precious in the name of maintaining strength. Jake listened quietly to the commander's story, then shared his own memories of growing up with a disabled sister. He talked about the challenges, yes, but also about the gifts. Amy had taught him patience and compassion. She had shown him that different did not mean lesser. The accommodations made for her had led to innovations that helped everyone. Admiral Krelthar observed these conversations from the camp. He saw the beginning of a transformation in Commander Vexnor, and he knew that this moment would have consequences far beyond one human pilot and one dragon hatchling. The Federation was built on respect for the traditions and cultures of its member species, but it was also founded on principles of protecting sentient life and promoting cooperation between different peoples. What happened when those principles came into conflict? That was the question now facing them all, and the Admiral suspected that the answer would reshape the Federation in ways none of them could fully predict. As he prepared his report for the Federation Council, Admiral Krelthar chose his words carefully. The news spread through the Federation faster than anyone expected. What had started as a simple protocol violation by a junior human officer had become the subject of heated debate across hundreds of worlds. The communication networks buzzed with opinions, arguments, and passionate declarations from beings of every species. On the Dragon homeworld, the Elder Council convened an emergency session. The ancient dragons gathered in their grand hall, a cavern carved from living stone over thousands of years. These were the keepers of tradition, dragons who had lived for centuries and guided their people through wars, plagues, and the challenges of joining the galactic community. They listened to Commander Vexnor's report with expressions that ranged from anger to disbelief. The eldest among them, a dragon named Krathzor whose scales had faded to pale gray with age, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. He said that the human had committed an unforgivable offense. He had interfered with dragon law, with traditions that predated the Federation itself. The hatchling should have been allowed to die with dignity, as countless others had before. To do otherwise was to show disrespect for everything the dragon people valued. But there were other voices in that council chamber. Younger dragons, those who had served in the Federation military alongside other species, began to speak up. They talked about the human concept of adaptation and innovation. They mentioned the incredible technology other species had developed to overcome their natural limitations. The humans themselves wore suits to survive in harsh environments. The aquatic Selkians used breathing devices to work on land. Why should dragons not develop ways to help their own disabled members? The debate grew heated. Some argued that strength through selection had made the dragon people great. Others countered that true strength came from overcoming challenges, not avoiding them. The council chamber echoed with voices raised in argument for the first time in living memory. Finally, Krathzor called for order. The Elder Council would make no decision yet. The matter would be taken to the Federation Council, where all member species could weigh in. Admiral Krelthar received the summons 3 days later. The Federation Council requested his presence at the capital station, along with Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Commander Vexnor, and the hatchling Sparks. A formal hearing would be held to determine whether Jake's actions warranted punishment and whether the hatchling would be allowed to live. Jake took the news calmly. He had known from the beginning that this moment would come. He spent the next week preparing for the hearing with the same determination he brought to everything. He contacted scientists on Earth requesting data on prosthetics and adaptive technology. He reached out to veterinarians who worked with disabled animals. He gathered testimony from people like his sister Amy, who could speak to the value of accommodation and support for those with disabilities. The human government on Earth watched the situation with great interest. Humanity was still new to the Federation, still proving themselves worthy of membership. Some advisors warned that Jake's actions could damage Earth's reputation, that they should distance themselves from this controversy. But others saw an opportunity to demonstrate human values on a galactic stage. In the end, Earth's leadership decided to support Jake fully, sending their best engineers and medical specialists to help prepare his case. Sparks had grown stronger in the weeks since Jake first found him. The hatchling was now the size of a large horse, and his personality had blossomed. He was curious, playful, and remarkably intelligent. With Jake's help and the equipment that human engineers had designed, Sparks could move with surprising grace despite his damaged wing. The support harness they built for him distributed weight properly and gave him stability. It was not natural flight, but it was mobility and independence. Commander Vexnor had become an unexpected ally. The old warrior spent hours with Jake and Sparks learning about human approaches to disability and rehabilitation. He watched as the hatchling solved increasingly complex puzzles, demonstrating cognitive abilities that matched or exceeded typical dragon standards. Vexnor began to see what his people had been losing all these centuries. Not just individual lives, but perspectives and abilities that could have enriched dragon culture. The journey to the capital station took 2 days by transport ship. Jake spent most of that time with Sparks, helping the young dragon adjust to the artificial gravity and enclosed spaces of the ship. Sparks was nervous, sensing that something important was about to happen. Jake kept him calm with quiet words and gentle touches, the bond between them obvious to everyone who saw them together. When they arrived at the capital station, they were escorted to comfortable quarters to await the hearing. Jake looked out the viewport at the massive structure, a marvel of engineering that housed representatives from hundreds of worlds. Somewhere in this station, people were deciding Sparks' fate. The thought made his stomach tight with anxiety, but he pushed the feeling aside. He had to focus on making the best case possible. The hearing was scheduled for the following morning. Jake barely slept that night, running through his arguments in his mind. He knew the opposition would present logical, practical reasons for upholding dragon tradition. He would need to counter with equally strong arguments for change. But more than logic, he needed to make the council see Sparks as an individual, a thinking being with his own value and potential. The grand chamber of the Federation Council was overwhelming in its scale. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, and the walls were lined with seats for representatives from every member species. Humans occupied a small section, having joined so recently that they had minimal voting power. The dragons held a prominent position, their large forms requiring specially built seating. The Admiral sat in the command position, ready to moderate the proceedings. Jake stood in the center of the chamber floor looking small and vulnerable. Sparks was beside him, wearing his support harness and staying close to the human for comfort. The young dragon's head swiveled as he took in the enormous space and the hundreds of beings staring down at them. Jake reached over and touched Sparks gently, a silent reassurance. The prosecution presented their case first. A dragon lawyer named Velkara spoke with cold precision about tradition, resource allocation, and cultural sovereignty. She argued that every species had the right to determine their own practices regarding offspring. The dragons had maintained their strength and prominence through careful selection. Allowing defective individuals to survive would dilute the species over time. Furthermore, resources were not infinite. Every accommodation made for Sparks was a resource that could have been used elsewhere. Belcara also emphasized that Jake had violated direct orders. He had trespassed in restricted areas, interfered with dragon cultural practices, and ignored multiple protocols. If the council allowed such behavior to go unpunished, it would set a dangerous precedent. Junior officers could not be allowed to disregard rules simply because they disagreed with them emotionally. The arguments were logical and well presented. Jake felt a chill as he listened, knowing that many council members would find these points persuasive. When Belcara finished, there were murmurs of agreement from various sections of the chamber. Then it was Jake's turn to speak. He walked to the center of the floor, took a deep breath, and began. He did not try to use complex legal arguments or technical language. Instead, he spoke from his heart about what he had learned in his time with Sparks. He described how the hatchling had adapted to his disability, developing stronger legs and more precise control of his limited abilities. He talked about Sparks' intelligence, his problem-solving skills, his capacity for joy and affection. Jake addressed the council directly, asking them a simple question. Did the Federation exist to protect only the strong and perfect, or did it exist to protect all sentient life? He reminded them that humanity had been considered weak when they first applied for membership. Humans needed environmental suits on most planets. They had fragile bodies and short lifespans compared to many species. Yet they had been accepted because they proved their worth through innovation, determination, and cooperation. He pulled up holographic displays showing data from Earth. He presented cases of disabled humans who had made extraordinary contributions to their society. Scientists, artists, leaders, teachers, all people who might have been discarded under systems that valued only physical perfection. He showed medical data proving that Sparks was healthy in every way, except for his wing structure. His mind was sharp, his other body systems were strong, and with appropriate support he could live a full and productive life. Most powerfully, Jake demonstrated Sparks' abilities in real time. He set up a complex puzzle that required multiple steps to solve. The council watched as Sparks studied the problem, tried different approaches, and eventually found a creative solution that even impressed the dragon representatives. The hatchling could not fly, but his mind soared. Jake finished his presentation by speaking directly to the dragon section of the council. He said he meant no disrespect to their traditions. He understood that those traditions had served them well for thousands of years. But he also believed that the best traditions were those that could grow and adapt. The Federation Council chamber buzzed with conversation after Jake finished his presentation. Representatives from different species leaned toward each other, discussing what they had heard and seen. Some looked moved by the demonstration of Sparks' intelligence. Others maintained skeptical expressions, clearly unconvinced that emotion should override established tradition. Admiral Krelthar called for order, and the chamber gradually quieted. The voting process would begin, but first, representatives who wished to speak could address the council. Several hands, claws, and various appendages rose into the air requesting recognition. The first to speak was a representative from the Korthan Collective, a species known for their rigid social structures. Ambassador Trelmar stood, his crystalline body refracting light across the chamber. He argued that Jake's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, were dangerous. If every Federation member could ignore protocols based on personal feelings, chaos would result. Rules existed for a reason. The human had broken those rules and consequences must follow. As for the hatchling, while its intelligence was impressive, the dragon people had the right to manage their population according to their own cultural values. Next, a human representative named Director Kate Walsh stood to speak. She was a senior diplomat from Earth, chosen specifically for this hearing because of her experience in cross-cultural negotiations. Walsh acknowledged that Jake had violated protocols, but she argued that sometimes the right thing to do conflicted with the official thing to do. She spoke about human history, about times when laws and traditions had been unjust, and how progress had only come when people were brave enough to challenge those systems. Walsh pointed out that the Federation's own charter spoke of protecting sentient life and promoting cooperation between species. Jake's actions had been in service of those core principles. He had not acted out of malice or disrespect, but out of compassion and moral conviction. These were qualities the Federation should encourage, not punish. A dragon representative named Sharnix stood next, and the chamber fell especially quiet. Sharnix was relatively young for a dragon, only about a century old. But she had earned respect for her service in the Federation Defense Forces. She spoke carefully, knowing her words would carry weight with both dragons and other species. Sharnix said that she had struggled with this issue deeply. She had been raised with the traditional beliefs, taught that difficult choices were necessary for the strength of their people. But serving in the Federation military had exposed her to different perspectives. She had fought alongside humans who never gave up, even when injured. She had seen species with natural disadvantages develop incredible technology to overcome their limitations. She had learned that strength took many forms. Looking at Sparks now, demonstrating intelligence and adaptability, Sharnix questioned whether the old ways truly served her people best. Perhaps it was time to consider that their traditions, while born of practical necessity in ancient times, could evolve to reflect new possibilities. The dragon people had access to technology and knowledge that their ancestors could never have imagined. Why not use those resources to help their own kind? Her words caused a stir in the dragon section. Some elder dragons looked angry at what they saw as betrayal of their values. Others, particularly younger ones, nodded in agreement. The generational divide within dragon society was becoming visible to the entire Federation. Commander Vexnor requested permission to speak, and Admiral Krelthar granted it. The old warrior stood, his crimson scales catching the light as he moved to address the council. Everyone knew Vexnor's reputation as a traditionalist, so his words carried enormous weight. The commander spoke of his centuries of service, of his unwavering dedication to dragon law and custom. He spoke of his own clutchmate who had been left to die because of weak lungs. He had accepted that decision without question, because it was the way things had always been. But watching Jake care for Sparks, seeing the bond between them and witnessing the hatchling's remarkable development, had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. Vexnor admitted that his people might have been wrong. Not maliciously wrong, but wrong nonetheless. The traditions had served them in an earlier time when resources were scarce and survival was uncertain. But times had changed. The dragons were now part of a vast federation with access to incredible technology and support systems. They no longer had to make the harsh choices that their ancestors had faced. More importantly, Vexnor argued that true strength was not about eliminating weakness. It was about adaptation, resilience, and compassion. Sparks had demonstrated all of these qualities. With support, he had learned to overcome his disability and thrive. That kind of determination and creativity was exactly what the dragon people should value and nurture. The commander finished by saying that he would vote to allow Sparks to live and to give Jake Morrison a commendation rather than punishment. The human had shown courage in standing up for what he believed was right, even at great personal cost. That was the kind of character the Federation needed in its members. The chamber erupted in discussion after Vexnor sat down. The fact that such a respected dragon traditionalist had changed his position was significant. Admiral Krelthar had to call for order multiple times before the noise subsided enough to continue. Several more representatives spoke, some supporting Jake and Sparks, others arguing for upholding dragon tradition and punishing protocol violations. The debate went on for hours, revealing deep philosophical divisions about the nature of strength, the value of tradition, and the role of compassion in society. Finally, Admiral Krelthar announced that the council would vote. The voting system was complex, with each species' votes weighted according to their population, length of Federation membership, and contribution to Federation resources. The dragons held significant voting power, which meant the decision would largely depend on how the dragon representatives split. The vote was conducted electronically, with results displayed on a massive screen. The chamber watched in tense silence as the numbers updated. The margin was incredibly close, closer than almost any Federation vote in recent memory. For several minutes, the outcome swung back and forth as final votes were registered. When the last vote came in, the result appeared on the screen. By a margin of just 3%, the council voted to allow Sparks to live. However, there were significant conditions attached to this decision. Jake Morrison would be held personally responsible for Sparks' welfare and development. The hatchling would need to demonstrate his ability to function as a productive member of society. If Sparks proved unable to meet basic standards or became a burden on Federation resources, the decision would be reviewed and potentially reversed. Additionally, a new protocol would be established for all Federation species. Cases of disabled offspring would no longer be automatically handled according to traditional practices. Instead, each case would be evaluated individually to determine if the disability could be managed with available technology and support. Species would be encouraged, though not required, to consider alternatives to euthanasia when viable options existed. As for Jake's protocol violations, the Council ruled that while his actions had been technically illegal, they had been motivated by moral conviction and had led to an important discussion about Federation values. He would receive an official reprimand in his record, but no other punishment. In fact, several Council members suggested he should be commended for his compassion and courage. The chamber erupted in noise again, with some representatives celebrating the decision and others protesting it. Jake stood in the center of the floor, barely able to process what had just happened. Sparks pressed against his side, sensing the human's emotional state and offering comfort. Admiral Krelthar called Jake forward and formally announced the Council's decision. He looked the young human in the eyes and said that Jake had challenged the Federation to examine its values and consider whether they were living up to their founding principles. It had been uncomfortable, controversial, and at times divisive, but it had also been necessary. The Admiral hoped that this decision would lead to positive changes throughout Federation society. Jake could only nod, his throat tight with emotion. He had not been certain they would win. The arguments against them had been strong, rooted in logic and tradition. But somehow they had convinced enough Council members that compassion and potential mattered as much as efficiency and custom. Commander Vexnor approached Jake as the Council chamber began to empty. The old dragon looked tired but also strangely lighter, as if a burden he had carried for centuries had been lifted. He placed one massive claw gently on Jake's shoulder and thanked him. The human had given the dragon people a chance to evolve, to become something better than they had been. Not all dragons would accept this change quickly, but seeds had been planted. Over the next few days, Jake received messages from across the galaxy. Some were supportive, praising his courage and compassion. Others were critical, accusing him of forcing human values onto other cultures. His family on Earth sent their love and support, with his sister Amy recording a special message telling him how proud she was. 3 years passed since the day Jake Morrison first found a small dragon hatchling struggling behind crystal rocks on Draken Prime. 3 years that had transformed not just one life, but countless lives across the Federation. The changes had not come easily or without resistance, but they had come nonetheless. Sparks was no longer a small hatchling. He had grown into a juvenile dragon roughly the size of a small spacecraft, his deep blue scales gleaming with health and vitality. His left wing remained twisted and unable to provide flight, but the human engineers had continued to refine his support harness with each stage of his growth. The current version incorporated Federation gravity technology with Earth's biomechanical design principles, giving Sparks fluid movement on the ground and limited flight capability for short distances. But the truly remarkable change was not physical. Sparks had developed a unique personality that combined dragon pride with human-influenced compassion. He had become something that dragon society had never seen before. A dragon who could not fly properly but had learned to soar in other ways. The breeding sanctuary on Draken Prime had been transformed into something that resembled both a traditional dragon nesting ground and an Earth rehabilitation center. Jake, now holding the rank of captain, had assembled a team of specialists from multiple species. There were human doctors and engineers, yes, but also dragon healers who had been brave enough to question tradition, Korthan teachers who brought structured learning approaches, and Selkian therapists who specialized in adaptive behavior. The facility now housed 12 disabled dragon hatchlings at various stages of development. Some had wing deformities like Sparks. Others had missing limbs, sensory impairments, or developmental delays. Each one received individualized care and support, designed to help them reach their full potential despite their challenges. On this particular morning, Admiral Krelthar made his scheduled visit to the sanctuary. He came every few months to observe progress and report back to the Federation Council. The program remained controversial, and there were always political factions calling for its termination. The Admiral's reports helped maintain support for the work being done here. Jake met the Admiral at the landing pad, looking older and more seasoned than the nervous young pilot who had first broken protocol 3 years ago. He had grown into his role, earning respect not through rank but through results. Even the most traditional dragons had to acknowledge that the program was producing remarkable outcomes. They walked together through the facility, with Jake explaining the latest developments. He showed the Admiral the learning center where young dragons were being taught to solve problems, using methods beyond the traditional dragon curriculum. Some of the techniques came from human education systems, others from various Federation species. The goal was to teach the hatchlings to think creatively and find multiple solutions to challenges. In the physical therapy area, a young dragon with a damaged spine was practicing movement exercises in a specially designed pool. The water's buoyancy allowed her to strengthen muscles without putting full weight on her injured back. 2 human therapists worked alongside a dragon instructor, combining their knowledge to develop the most effective treatment plan. But Admiral Krelthar was most interested in seeing Sparks, who had become something of a legend throughout the Federation. The young dragon was in the main training arena, and what the Admiral saw there made him stop in his tracks. Sparks was teaching a class of newly hatched dragons, both disabled and able-bodied. The curriculum had been expanded to include all hatchlings from the sanctuary, as it turned out that the adaptive techniques developed for disabled dragons were beneficial for everyone. Sparks moved through the group with confident authority despite his support harness, demonstrating a ground-based combat technique that utilized balance and leverage rather than aerial superiority. The young dragons watched their instructor with rapt attention. Sparks had developed a teaching style that was patient but demanding, encouraging his students to push their limits while also knowing when to offer support. When one hatchling struggled with a particular move, Sparks adjusted his approach, breaking the technique down into smaller steps and offering praise for incremental progress. Jake stood beside the Admiral, watching with obvious pride. He explained that Sparks had shown a natural talent for teaching and had requested to work with younger hatchlings. The dragon instructors had been skeptical at first, but Sparks had proven himself repeatedly. He understood struggle in a way that naturally gifted dragons did not, and that understanding made him an exceptional teacher. After the class ended, Sparks approached Jake and the Admiral. The young dragon had developed a distinctive way of moving, using his powerful hind legs and tail for propulsion, while his support harness kept him balanced. It was not traditional dragon movement, but it was effective and uniquely his own. Admiral Krelthar greeted Sparks with the respect due to any Federation citizen. The dragon returned the greeting formally, his voice deeper now with maturity. They spoke for a while about the training program, about the challenges of teaching young dragons to think differently about combat and problem-solving. Sparks spoke with intelligence and insight, his mind clearly as sharp as any dragon the Admiral had ever met. During their conversation, a commotion arose from one of the nesting areas. A new hatchling had just emerged from its egg and something was wrong. The calls went out for medical staff and Jake immediately started running toward the nesting grounds with Sparks close behind. Admiral Krelthar followed, curious to see how they would handle the situation. They found a small crowd gathered around a newly hatched dragon. The hatchling was tiny, barely larger than a house cat with pale green scales. Her right foreleg was severely underdeveloped, little more than a stub. The dragon parents stood nearby, their faces showing the same mixture of grief and resignation that dragon parents had shown for thousands of years when a defective hatchling was born. But things were different now. Instead of taking the hatchling away to die, the medical team immediately began assessment procedures. Jake knelt beside the tiny dragon, speaking softly while a human doctor and a dragon healer examined the underdeveloped limb. They took measurements, ran scans, and discussed treatment options. Sparks approached the dragon parents and spoke to them in the traditional dragon language, a conversation the Admiral could not fully follow but could understand through body language and tone. The parents were torn between tradition and hope. They had heard about the new program, about dragons like Sparks who thrived despite their disabilities. But accepting that possibility meant abandoning beliefs that had guided their species for millennia. The mother dragon asked Sparks a question, her voice trembling with emotion. Sparks answered by demonstrating his own capabilities. He showed them how he could move, fight, and function. He told them about his life, about the things he had learned and accomplished. He explained that his disability had not prevented him from finding purpose and joy. If anything, it had given him unique perspectives that enriched his existence. The father dragon looked at Jake and asked, through Commander Vexnor, who had arrived to help translate, whether the human truly believed their hatchling could have a good life. Jake looked the father dragon directly in the eyes and said, yes, absolutely. The path would not be easy and there would be challenges. But with support, love, and determination, the hatchling could grow into whoever she was meant to be. Her missing leg did not define her potential. The parents made their decision. They would entrust their daughter to the program. The medical team quickly took the hatchling to begin treatment, already discussing prosthetic options and therapy plans. The parents watched their daughter being carried away, fear and hope mingling in their ancient eyes. Admiral Krelthar observed all of this with deep satisfaction. This was what the Federation was meant to be: different species working together, learning from each other and finding better ways forward. The human concept of seeing potential rather than limitation had taken root and was bearing fruit. Over the following days, the Admiral completed his inspection and prepared his report. He documented the success stories, the challenges that remained, and the innovative solutions being developed. The program had proven its worth beyond any reasonable doubt. Disabled dragons were not only surviving but thriving, contributing to their society in meaningful ways. Before leaving Dracon Prime, Admiral Krelthar requested one final meeting with Jake and Sparks. They met in a quiet garden area of the sanctuary, where flowering plants from various worlds created a riot of colors and scents. The Admiral wanted to tell them something he had been thinking about for a long time. He said that when he first watched surveillance footage of Jake playing with a disabled dragon hatchling 3 years ago, he had been puzzled and concerned. The human's actions had seemed illogical, even reckless. But over time, he had come to understand something profound about humanity and about the Federation itself. The Admiral explained that most Federation species had joined after reaching high levels of technological development. They brought advanced science, powerful weapons, or unique resources. Humans had brought something different and equally valuable: